All right, so let's talk about mountain labs. And this idea sort of comes from Justin Murphy's Mountain Mansions post, where he sort of recommends young adults go off into rural areas and essentially found new communities based off of being able to do remote internet work. And within these communities, you essentially have the ability to build them how you choose. And so that's sort of something I'm very interested in. Like, it really appeals to me the idea of going out into some beautiful natural area and being with other people who sort of think in a similar way to myself. And so when I think about those sorts of communities, there's kind of two things that bind them together. There's first their infrastructure, like the buildings, the walkways, the electrical and sewer grid, like basically all of the things that physically realize the community that falls under infrastructure. And the second thing is institutions. You don't need a school building to have a school. A school is any building in which you have a teacher teaching students. So really, institutions are about the relationships between people and the relationships between themselves and the labor they perform. And this is especially of interest to me because it seems like some of our American institutions like aren't doing so hot. In particular, like universities, they're in a spot of trouble. And I think when you look at do I want to go do research at a university, especially, it seems like at the moment things are not great there. And that means there are room for viable alternatives. I think highly capable researchers, highly capable people, they're going to increasingly look at the university and be like, I don't want to pay that much money and go to Zoom calls. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not going to help me. And ultimately, when it comes to the institution itself, I think there's room for an institution in which researchers do research. They don't spend time fighting for grant money. They don't spend time dealing with politics. And furthermore, I think there's a room for an institution where more research directions can be pursued, where it's sort of what grant money is available determines where the research money goes. Like, that's not the best way of doing things, I think. So let's assume we're talking about hard research because I want to talk about labs. Luckily, they are very easy to start in some sense. They kind of like the minimum requirement is one scientist or engineer and the equipment they ask for. And that means like a garage is a laboratory when it really comes down to it. So in terms of, starting a laboratory in a community, like you can start pretty simple. But that's not exactly what I want. I'm interested in more interesting, larger projects. And I think kind of what we have to realize as scientists and engineers is there's no reason we can't have the Manhattan Project again. Like, I don't want to do nukes 2.0, but just getting a bunch of people into a room and solving a problem, like there are barriers to getting it organized, but it's an entirely possible thing should we try. Like, that's kind of what it comes down to. Like, the right people have to try, and there's no, reason it couldn't happen. So that's where I want my mountain laboratories to go. I'm not going to pretend this is like an easy goal. It's extremely difficult. I don't know where the money is necessarily come from. I don't know how much actual equipment could be supported. I don't know if it could scale, but that's why I'm having this conversation with you right now, is to say, hey, what do you think of this? Isn't this possible? Maybe. But let's step back a bit. Why am I tying this to an intentional community? It seems like you want to do a research project, go do that in some existing place. And to answer that question, I'd like to say, like, well, why do I want to be there in the first place? And to me, it's all about sort of a return to the structures that have worked for humans for thousands of years. It's a return to being a part of a tighter knit tribe, of having closer connections that are more meaningful with people, and really kind of against the alienation of the modern world. Like, I think we all feel that. I think it's getting worse. But it's totally possible to have communities that are oriented towards human flourishing, and that's what I want to be a part of. So when you look about sort of what institutions these communities can grow inside them, we find we can kind of set the intent of these institutions. So the research that is being performed in these laboratories, I think they should be for the community. And the researchers should be embedded into that community. You'd be co-located, and that gives them a vested interest in their own succeeding beyond just wealth or prestige or whatever. And that means there's a virtuous cycle here where the more the community supports this institution, the more successful the institution is, the better the community does. And yeah, like that's kind of what it comes down to. I think the funny thing is there's actually a large frontier. It's not quite the West as it was one, but there's actually a lot of room for new types of institutions. And the more that our institutions kind of decay and get worse and seem crappy, the higher the demand will be for new ones. And yes, that's why I want my mountain lab, please. So yeah, if you are like one of the few people in the world who fantasize about Bell Labs, like get in touch. Let me know what you think. Because I like I said, honestly, I think the only thing preventing us from significant action is just time and trying. So let's do something about that.